Welcome to the show, Sue.
Hi, thank you.
So, my favorite question to start off with is what's your sober date?
My sobriety date is September 15th, 1989.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 30 I just celebrated 35 years.
I was going to say 35 years. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
I know. It seems like yesterday, but yet it seems like 35 years ago.
Yeah, that was my brother was born October 10th, 1989. So, that's
Wow.
how I knew it was 35 years because he just celebrated 35 years of being alive. Uh,
Yeah. Yep.
my
Yep.
second favorite question to ask is what was going on September 14th of 1989?
September 14th. Boy, I had been sober up to that date about 5 months. I got sober in April, and on September 14th, I made a few phone calls to some friends for some um, drugs or alcohol, whatever, more drugs. And they didn't call me back. So I went to a meeting. I went to a beginner's meeting. I went to another meeting, and I really thought I was all set. And I got home and knocked on my door, and who's there? But my friend, and I let him in, and I got high, and I proceeded to preach AA to him the whole night.
Yeah.
And I knew at that point I was done, that it wasn't working anymore.
So what did you relapse with? What substance?
It was alcohol and cocaine.
Okay.
I was a big cocaine. I liked speed. I liked cocaine. I've done heroin. I think I've done just about anything that's out there.
Cocaine and
Um,
alcohol go together like milk and cookies.
absolutely, you couldn't do one without the other,
Yep.
and
Yeah, I
that
was
was my
big
whole
into
thing.
cocaine. I was mixing. I was big on snorting whatever it was. I wanted to snort it, and I would mix cocaine with oxycodone and
Ooh,
snort a line of both. Or sometimes I'd pop a Xanax and then snort a line of both and really speedball that way.
wow, yeah, I would shoot speedballs. I did that with heroin and cocaine.
Now, where are
That was
you from
big.
originally, Sue?
Originally, I'm from Western Massachusetts. So our area up there was a big traffic area for the mob. So they were big heroin, dealers. The mob was selling heroin.
So you
So it
were
was
out by
from,
you were out by Worcester.
yep, not far from Worcester, about a half
Yep.
hour away.
You used an R when you said it.
Worcester.
I grew up in I didn't grow up in Massachusetts. I lived in Massachusetts on and off from 19 to 25.
Oh, wow. So where'd you live?
South Shore.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I bounced around. I lived in Carver, and then I lived in Middleborough. Then I lived in Plymouth, and then I lived in New Bedford.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was born in Western Mass. So I was in the Springfield area,
Oh,
but
okay.
I know all those areas because it's a small state and,
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
take long to travel.
yeah. I'm from Jersey originally, and then I moved to Massachusetts after I graduated high school. My whole family uprooted and went to Mass. I went to college at Quincy College,
Mhm.
the Plymouth location, and I loved Massachusetts. I was
Yep.
I was a big drinker. I had a fake ID, and I would go to the bar all the time after a night of work. I worked in Plymouth and I worked in Kingston, so it was easy to go right to a bar and have a drink after work. And I didn't slow down drinking until I was 22, and that's when I was introduced to drugs, and
Oh, yeah. That's the
drugs
fun
took
part.
over. Yeah, drugs took over for me. You have any brothers or sisters, Sue?
I do, and actually they're all sober. My first sister to get sober is, I think she's like 40 years sober now. And she's primarily in NA because she was more drugs. My brother is 39 years sober.
Wow.
He was more alcohol. He was complete alcoholic, and he hit bottom. My other sister is 37 years sober, and I have 35. So I was the last one. My father, I shouldn't say I was the last one. My father was after me, and he died 10 years sober.
Wow, that's a
So
big. But you guys got like 120 years between the three of you,
yeah, and we've all and my son
or
has
four of you.
15 years sober.
Your son's got. Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
Congratulations to your family.
Oh, it's just absolutely a family disease, you know. We have
Now,
one still out there, but my nephew, and he's still out there. He's out in California, and that's been rough.
yeah, I got sober in California actually, and it's a big party area too, and I've had many guests from Skid Row on my show, and
Yeah,
they talked about the using and how easy it was to get high living on Skid Row and being homeless and running around stealing, beg, borrowing, whatever you had to do for money.
yep,
Um, you're going to get money every day in order to keep yourself high.
yep.
Um,
And he was there. He was there, and so far he's been clean for a couple months, so he's
okay.
doing okay. So
There's so
that's
many
good.
meetings. There's 500 weekly meetings in LA County.
Wow, wow.
Yeah. You
Yeah,
know,
it's incredible. I've met a lot of people from LA, and I've been like they're in the San Francisco area, and I've been there, 5, 6, 7 times to visit, and
I've always wanted
I
to go to
love that.
San Francisco.
Yeah,
It's
it's
on my
neat.
list. I did a connecting flight in San Francisco when I moved back from LA to Jersey, where I'm from. Well, in this case, I moved from LA to Pennsylvania in Amish country.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but I moved 30 times in 12 years.
Wow.
All in my 20s and the end of my teens and in my early 30s, 30 times, five different states. And
Wow.
California was amazing. That's where I got clean. I went to 3 or 4 meetings a day. They said to do 90 and 90. I did 250 and 90.
I pretty much did that when I first got sober too. Yeah.
I was addicted to meetings. I was going to
Yep.
NA, I was going to AA, I was going to CA, and
Yep.
every
Absolutely.
day I found 3 or 4 meetings between the 7 a.m., the noon to 7 p.m. I went every day to 11 p.m. late night meeting. I was bouncing all around Santa Monica and Venice. I was all over the place in Western LA. I
Wow,
loved it.
that's nice. Yeah, that's a nice area. I'd
Yeah,
love to live there. It's just way too expensive.
it is. Yep.
And
Yeah, I loved it out there. I moved back because wanted to be closer to my dad, and we started a business together, my dad and brother and I. So, my dad had missed me, and so I came back to go back to the family business in plumbing.
wow, that's a good business.
Yep, my dad. We started a Roto Rooter franchise,
Yep.
and my dad actually. That's why we moved to Massachusetts in 2005. My dad ran all the Roto Rooters in Massachusetts.
Oh yeah, I remember them. Yep. Yep.
Yep,
I do remember them.
yep. He ran the whole
Yeah,
state.
it's incredible. I know I became a social worker after I got sober, and I worked with people with mental illness and addiction for a number of years.
That's what I'm
And
going back to school for, actually.
yeah, and it was great. I loved it. It was such a learning experience to work with people with mental illness and addiction, because it's like the chicken and the egg, which one comes first,
Yep.
you just didn't know which one you had to treat first because they were both equally needed treatment. So
Yeah, I
you
battle with
know
bipolar.
yeah, yeah,
I'm
so
OCD and
it's really
bipolar, so it's so many different things. I'm in
right.
therapy, I'm in psychiatry, I work the steps in 2 different fellowships.
Yep, yep, yep. And I also had a hard time figuring out where I belonged because I had a drug addiction, I had alcohol, and I met this wonderful woman who became my sponsor after on September 15th when I went back to a meeting. Um, a woman was sitting there and she knew there was something wrong with me. And I just said to her, I said, I relapsed last night. And she said, maybe there's just something you're not doing. They're only suggestions, but are you following all the suggestions? And I said, I don't have a sponsor. And she said, well, why don't you try doing everything 100% and see what happens? So she became my sponsor. And she said, your body doesn't know if you snort it, shot it, drank it. It just knows the high it got.
Yep.
So it doesn't, it's wherever you feel like you want to be, you're comfortable at, go to that meeting.
Yeah, you have to go as far for your recovery as you went for your addiction.
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
I learned that. And when I went back to Pennsylvania, rather, I was driving for last 2 years of my addiction. I was driving an hour and 45 minutes each way to get pills, 4 to 5
Mm,
times a week. And that's the insanity that it takes you to, and the lengths that you go for your addiction. So I
absolutely.
found a meeting 45 minutes away that I went to twice a week. I was going to meetings daily still, but I wanted to go to a meeting far away because I felt like I needed to drive as far from my recovery as I did from my addiction.
Absolutely. Yep.
And
Absolutely.
that was really helpful because I would meditate on my way back. I would,
Oh,
roll
that's
the
a good
windows,
idea.
all the windows rolled all the way down, the music off, and I would just reflect on that meeting and what I took from it, what I learned from it. And, I gained a lot of knowledge by doing it that way.
Oh, you do. We did like up in Massachusetts, our meetings were you always had a bookie, so you'd go out to other meetings and you'd speak at other meetings. So it was always great to do the drive out because we would go a bunch of us and drive out to a meeting
Yep.
and then have another meeting on the way back. The fellowship was so important to me in that respect. And I miss that. I miss that living in Florida. Like I'm here 7, 8 months out of the year. And then I go back up to Massachusetts for 4 or 5 months every summer.
Yeah,
So that's really great.
it's beautiful up in Massachusetts in the summertime. The weather, I miss
Oh,
that.
it's gorgeous. Yep. So we're up there. We bought a place a couple of years ago and decided to go back and forth. And, this is our primary residence in Florida, which I love. I absolutely love it here. The weather is fabulous. Like today, it'll be in the 80s and, sunny and bright. And, it's getting cold in Massachusetts.
Yeah, it's in the. I went out to 7-Eleven earlier to get my Celsius drinks, and it was 49 degrees. My car told me when I started my car is
Wow.
40
Yep.
49. I guess we're in the fall now. Um,
Yep.
so where did you land in your brothers and sisters? Were you like the oldest, youngest, middle,
Youngest.
youngest?
Youngest. And the
So
last of the siblings to get sober.
now,
Which
when
I knew they had a problem, but I didn't.
what was the age gaps?
My older sister's like 5 or 6 years older than me, and then 4 years, and then my brother's a year and a half older than me. So him and I were always close.
Yeah,
And when I was still out there, he would come to my house and he would leave pamphlets and he'd leave a big book and it would be over in the corner on the table. And I'd see it after he left. And it's like, I'm not touching that. I
yeah.
don't need that. And he did it on purpose.
Yeah, just to tell you there's a way out.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Now, what did you discover first, Zeus? Alcohol or drugs?
Alcohol. When I was probably 13, 12, 13. I mean, I was young. I would go with my girlfriends and we'd stand outside the liquor store and we'd ask people to buy buy us liquor. And
Yep.
my girlfriends, we'd wait like an hour and nobody would show up and they go, okay, let's go. And I'm like, no, no, we gotta wait.
Yeah. We had one of those
That was the
shady.
most important thing.
We had a shady motel that was right next to the liquor store in Jersey, where I'm from. So we would get shady characters coming from the motel over to the liquor store,
Oh,
and we
perfect.
would pay them for a 6-pack. Like, hey, buy yourself a 6-pack if you get me a bottle of this. And they would take it. And I started drinking at 11, and it was
Wow.
more out of curiosity. And my friend would sleep over, and we would steal some Captain Morgan and make Captain and Cokes and watch movies and think we were cool. I started drinking alcoholically when I was 12. And when I say that, I don't mean that I was drinking every day, but I was drinking for the effect that it produced.
Right,
You know,
exactly. Me too. And
you
and
know
that became more important than going
yep,
out with my girlfriends. It was getting the booze.
yep. I was bullied a lot because of my size, because I'm a bigger
Mm.
guy. and that's the age where you start getting changed for gym and getting you can get made fun of for being heavy. And
Right, right.
that was my escape. I would have a bottle. My parents weren't drinkers, and they would have bottles of liquor, but they knew how to throw a party. And there would be bottles left over liquor they would just store in the basement. So they never knew how much I was drinking out of the bottles.
Oh, yep.
So I would steal a bottle of like vodka and I would keep it in my bedroom. And if I was having a bad day, I would drink about it and take some shots, smoke my cigarettes in the closet where I had a walk-in closet in my bedroom, and there was a window. I was in the attic and no one ever went up to the attic. So I would smoke cigarettes out my window. And I started smoking cigarettes at 13. And I was a problem child. I'm the oldest of three, and I broke all the rules from my brother and sister to follow.
Ah,
Now you're 12, 13 years old, and that's when you said you start drinking for the effect.
yes, yep. And that was the most important thing to me, was to have the alcohol. It wasn't going to the party with my friends, it was the alcohol. I didn't realize it at the time that alcohol was a problem for me, but I started seeking it out more and more. And, then pot came along, and, then speed. People, like back then, we did a lot of speed. So you'd get the pills, and, you'd buy the pills, and I loved it. And, acid and mushrooms and all that stuff. And it was anytime I could get my hands on anything, I would do it. And that was my life. And I hung around with people that wanted to do that.
Now, how old
School
were you
wasn't
when you tried
important.
acid?
Probably 14 or 15.
It's kind of
Yeah.
young for a drug like that.
Oh, yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, it wasn't acid. I loved acid when I discovered it in my early 20s. I think I was 21 when I first did acid. And the introspective thoughts that come into your mind when you're high on it, I can't imagine being a teenager and having those kinds of thoughts that you're having.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was, and I did it often. We would do it a lot. We would have friends and we'd all hang out together and we'd do it. And um, it was just, yeah, it was a lot. So by the time I was, 17, I had to stop. I started heroin at 17. And,
Who introduced you to heroin?
my girlfriend, her and I, that did a lot of drugs together, throughout the years, had a boyfriend, and he did heroin. And, he said, "Oh, you don't want to ever try this." And of course, the minute you say that, it's like, yeah, I do. It's got to be really good.
Yeah.
That's my next step.
Yeah,
So I
it's
did.
you don't want to do this. Yes, I do want to do this.
Those are the worst words you can use to an addict, because they're going to do it.
Now, the first time you did heroin, did you snort it or smoke it or
Shot
shoot it?
it.
You
I
shot it?
shot it. Yep, the first time. Yeah, they only gave me a little bit, and I absolutely loved it. I absolutely, I fell in love, and that started my journey there.
Did you
Um,
ever shoot anything else, or was that your first time shooting anything?
that was my first time shooting anything at all. I had never done anything like that before.
Now, were you
And
still in school?
I was, on and off. I'd skip school, and then I have to go to summer school because I, didn't pass classes. And I started really not caring about school at all. And so I tried to cut down on the heroin, and not use it as much. So my thought was, okay, I met this guy, and I probably should tell you the whole story here. My
Yeah.
girlfriend and I that did heroin together, she said, "I have this guy I want you to meet." And I said, okay. So we went to this bar, and back then you could get into bars when you were younger. It did, nobody ever asked you. You just went in. And we went into this bar, and I passed out at the bar. And she said, "Oh, here he is." "I want to introduce you to this guy." The guy passed out on the bar. And so she woke him up. I met him, and, married him. Decided to get married. It's like, okay, he's good. He likes to drink. He's my type of guy. and I married him, and I thought that would get me off of the heroin, and I thought that would make me, I don't know, straighten out a little bit. I
Now,
really thought
how long were you guys together before you got married?
about a year. So I was like almost 19 and found out I was pregnant. So we decided we'd get married quick, and we got married. And you know, I did. I straightened out for quite a while, few years. We had two kids, and when the kids were about 4 or 5, his brother was a heroin addict, and I started asking him to get me heroin. I wanted to try it again and see what it was like, and it started the whole thing all over again. You
Now,
know,
when was this? If you don't mind me asking how old you were.
I was probably in my early 20s,
Was it
21,
like
22.
in the 70s?
Yeah, it would have been the late 70s, early
Okay.
80s. Yeah. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I decided that we had to straighten out. You know, my husband was drinking a lot. So we decided we were going to sell our house and move to a small little town out in the country and, you know, away from our friends and stuff. So it was about 45 minutes from where we lived, you know, at that time, and in a little town. And it helped for a year maybe, and then I was driving back to where I was hanging out with everybody else. You know? So it was just a longer drive now. You
Yep.
know?
Yeah, so you understand what I was talking about by driving far for your addiction.
Yeah, we do.
And
And you know, you think that it's going to be a cure, and it's not. You know.
the worst part about that is I lost my gallbladder 2 years in the recovery, because on those drives, I was usually withdrawing while I was driving. And
Wow.
so I had a little, barf bag in my car so that when I was stuck in traffic in Philly or driving on the turnpike in Pennsylvania, I could just throw up into that bag. And because it wasn't like I was throwing up after like you have food poisoning, I was throwing up bile. And
Right, right.
I
Because
threw
you're
up so much
withdrawing.
bile. Yeah, I threw up so much bile over the years that my gallbladder stopped functioning.
Wow.
So
Wow.
the worst part about losing my gallbladder was, oh shit, my light. Um, when I went on before I went under, I told the doctors I don't want any kind of drugs. Like, I want it, I'm sober, I'm clean. I don't want any kind of drugs. So they said, okay. And I woke up and I felt high. And I said to the nurse, I feel high right now. And she was like, oh, it's probably the anesthesia. And I said, no, this isn't anesthesia. And the doctor came in and I said, I feel high. And he was like, yeah, you looked uncomfortable. So we shot you with the Lauded and fentanyl. And
Wow.
I'm like, dude, I'm going to go into withdrawals. And he was like, no, you'll be fine. We know what we're doing. And it was an outpatient procedure. So I get out to the car, immediately start throwing up. And I threw up for 18 hours. I had a pillow against my stomach because of the incisions. I didn't want to have them break open. And I was like, maybe I'm not withdrawing. Maybe it's from losing my gallbladder. So I called my 85-year-old grandmother who had her gallbladder removed, in her 80s. And I said, Graham, how did you feel after you had it removed? She was like, oh, I was vacuuming. I was running over the place. I was fine.
Oh.
And I was like, son of a bitch.
Yep.
It's
It's
that
withdrawals.
withdrawals again. And I hated it. I was so upset with the doctors.
Wow.
So back to you in the driving. Did your husband know you were driving to get heroin?
Oh yeah. Yeah, he knew that. And you know, then I started with the coke. I decided to get off the heroin. So when I get off heroin, I would drink a lot, do a lot of coke. And I just switched, you know, I'd switch back and forth.
Were you
Um,
driving for the coke or did you have that locally?
no, I was driving for the coke because I didn't want anybody in the town I lived in where my kids went to school to know what I was doing. So I drive back to where I knew everybody, and you know, it was like the where I grew up, so I knew everybody there. And
Now
I'd
that
go
you had
there.
used the needle for heroin, did you use the needle for coke or did you snort it?
Um, no, I snorted it mostly, but in the end, I was, you know, doing a lot more freebasing and just, you know, I I was snorting it, shooting it. I was doing anything at that point, you know, at
So
the end.
Coke, Massachusetts, back in the 80s. Massachusetts and California had the purest form of cocaine in the whole entire country.
Well,
Uh,
I probably got it.
yeah. The reason is, do you know who George Young is? You ever see the movie Blow with Johnny Depp?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so he played George Young, who was from Weymouth,
Yep,
Massachusetts,
yep.
and he was trafficking cocaine to California and Massachusetts to spread around the East and West Coast. So when you were in Massachusetts and getting that cocaine, there's like a 95% chance it was coming straight from Colombia, not cut at all. And
It was fabulous. I mean, I have to say, it was, the 80s and Coke were just, you know,
running
that was it
rampant.
for me.
Yeah,
Yeah, you could get it anywhere.
yeah,
I had more friends that were dealers and I tried to, but I'd end up using it all.
yeah.
I get a big chunk and I go, okay, I'm going to sell this, and I used it all week. It was gone, and then I owe the money that I promised I'd sell it. So yeah, I spent a lot of money. I tried to still work and do things, and I was just not. I was barely functioning as a human being. My kids were like put on the back burner, and kind of took care of themselves, and I was barely there for them. I'd be out for 2 or 3 days on a binge with the coke, and just call them and tell them I'm okay, and I'll go, okay, I'll show up when they get out of school. And then I'd call again when they were out of school and say, okay, I'll be home in a little while. And their father would get home like an hour later, and I just go, well, he's there. I don't have to go back home and stay out. So I would do this for 2 or 3 days
Yeah,
and just stay out.
that's the insanity of this whole thing. Was your husband still drinking when you
Yeah,
were?
yeah, he was drinking, and it was finally in the last. It was in April of 1989. I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do it, and I had reached a point where I was driving home. It was like 5, 6 in the morning, and I wanted to just die. I was ready. I was ready to die, and I tried to hit a tree, and I couldn't do it. Tried to hit another one, couldn't do it. And
We are
finally, I got home.
we are so alike. Because I was picking out trees towards the end of my addiction,
Yeah.
and what I did was I started bringing my dog with me on those drives to Jersey because I knew if she was with me, I wouldn't drive into a tree because I wouldn't want to hurt her. And that's the only reason that I never drove into a tree is because I brought my dog with me on those drives. She
Wow.
loved being in the car. She would just sit and stare out the window the entire time, never bark. I would be parked in a McDonald's parking lot sometimes for 3 or 4 hours waiting for my dealer to get done work so I can get more and drive back. And she would just sit in the back seat of my car. I would take her out, let her go to the bathroom on the grass, put her back into the back seat. I would just be chain smoking until I can get my medicine, my
Yep. Yep.
medicine,
Oh yeah.
and then do my drive back. It's crazy that like some people that aren't addicts, they do 5 milligrams of Percocet and they're passed out. And
Yep.
here I am snorting 120 milligrams in one line and then just get energy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd be alive.
Amazing. Yep. Oh yeah, absolutely. You
So
know,
April, you were at your wits' end. Did you start attending meetings then?
I went into a 30-day rehab. I was actually the morning that I couldn't hit the trees, I got home, and a God moment. I said, I'm going to call my sister, who then lived in Boston, 45 minutes away, and tell her I need help. So I called her up and I said, I need help. I'm desperate. I need help. And she said, I'll be right there. And my next thought was, oh no, not yet. Maybe tomorrow. I'm thinking, oh no, not today. What am I going to do? And she hung up the phone, and like a little over an hour later, she was there. And my other sister came with her husband, who was also in recovery. And they said, you want to call detox, um, and you can go into a rehab, and and it kind of just happened so fast. and because I had never gone into detox, they took me right away. I guess now you have to, go through all these phone calls and stuff. It's totally different now. But I called and said, I need help, and they said, okay, be here at like, 2 o'clock. And I was really afraid. I had no idea what detox was all about. No idea. I'm at the time I was 32 years old, and I'm picturing detox as this place with these old men in a basement and in trench coats and skid row guys and I what I pictured was so far from what reality was that I went and detox, and where I went was on a penthouse top floor of a hospital with this big huge patio outside, and it was beautiful. It was really nice. And I spent 5 days there detoxing, and then I went into a 30-day rehab.
Yeah, it's one of those come to Jesus moments when you decide that you're going to do this. And, for me, it was April 20th of 2018, 420 for a pothead.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching a documentary called The Legend of 420 on Netflix. And I was like, oh, this is the appropriate thing to watch on 420 while I smoke weed and get high. And in the documentary, I was 32 at the time. I was 31 and a half. I was almost 32. And in the documentary is a bunch of different segments about weed being beneficial. And one of those segments was about a rehab in Los Angeles that let you smoke weed and helped you get off opiates and taught you how to smoke as a medicine as opposed to get high. And for the first time in a decade, I said to myself, I would do something like that. And then
Mm-hmm.
the next day, I spent 8 hours in the McDonald's parking lot with my dog, waiting for my dealer to answer me back. And, eventually I found them. I could only afford 3. And I did 2 right away because I was withdrawing so bad. And then I'm driving back the 2 hours and I'm on the PA Turnpike. And I said, what the hell am I doing? I have 1 left. I'm going to have to drive again tomorrow. This is insane. And I Googled high sobriety Los Angeles and it popped up with a phone number. It was 8 o'clock at night. I called 5 o'clock in, California, and somebody answered, and he talked to me for an hour and a half. And it was the first time that I felt heard in 20 years. And
Mm.
someone understood me. And he said, I'll get you a bed Wednesday, fly out Tuesday. And I said, okay. And, I'll do it. And I got high for 3 more days. I owed my dealer $1,800. And I said to him, listen, I got to do something. I got to go to rehab. And I don't know how I'm going to pay you back if I'm in rehab for the next 6 months. And he said, listen, if I never hear from you again, you don't owe me the money. But if I hear you're back in town and getting high, you owe me the money again.
Oh, wow.
And I haven't touched opiates since then.
What a guy.
Yeah, I mean, I made him a ton of money. He was like a dealer that had a lot and would sell in bulk. He didn't like to meet you for just 3 or 4. So what I would do is I would come to town and I would take orders from people. Like, how many do you want? How many do you want? And I
Oh,
would
yeah.
collect the money and then go see him and give him a sale of like 40 of them. And then, he would make a quick $1,000. So, and I would make a little bit of money by overcharging them. And so I would get a couple for free. And, I would do that every time I went to Jersey. Either way, so now that we've talked a lot about addiction years, now did your husband get sober too?
Yes. My husband, we I left him when I was first sober because he was still drinking. We ended up getting back together. I was about a year sober and he decided to get sober. So he went into rehab, got sober, and we got back together. And we're together for about 4 or 5 years. And it just didn't work out. So we divorced, which was really, really difficult in sobriety, because you develop friendships and, mutual friendships. You develop the meetings, you go to meetings together. All your friends in AA are like mutual friends.
Yeah.
So it's really difficult when you have a relationship and a marriage that long that,
Yeah, you were together like 15 years by my math.
yeah, 15, 16 years, I think we were together. And it was difficult. So, we divorced, and my kids by that time were teenagers, and they started their journey. And especially once we divorced, that's when their kind of addictions really took off. My older son liked pot, so he smoked a lot of pot. My younger son nosedived very, very quickly. He drank and used drugs, and he would be fine, and then a week later he'd have to be in rehab. I mean, he just nosedived that quickly. And his addiction just went on and on for many, many years. So that was difficult. I got to see it from the other side,
Yeah.
um, with the two of them. They both were pretty bad. I ended up about 2 years later, I got married again, and to somebody that I had met in meetings, and we got married. He had no children, so he was just the stepfather, and he was with me through that journey of my kids' addiction. Um, my older son got sober. He went into a halfway house and did the whole thing, and he did really good. And he drinks and smokes pot a little bit today. My younger one, Jamie, who was really bad, he was on the streets. He was a heroin addict and lived on the streets for the longest time. And that was probably the hardest thing I had to go through, was watching him, because I didn't think he'd make it. He was so bad. And there was one time where I was in the car with my other son, and somebody knocked on my window of my car. I pulled into the driveway, and he knocked on the window of my car, and I looked out, and I thought it was a homeless person. And my other son said to me, "Mom, that's Jamie." And I had no idea it was my own child. No idea, because he looked so bad. He looked like a skeleton. He was just in really, really rough shape. And many times he had been in and out of detoxes, rehabs. I mean, probably 30, 40 times. So I said to him, "Do you want help?" And he could only come in my house if he said he wanted help. So I let him in the house, and I said, "You're going to go up in the Berkshires to get help. The buses are few and far between to bring him back down." And I figured that was where he had the best chance to get sober. So I had him call up there, and he got into a rehab up there. And one of the greatest things was that they did a full medical before you went into the rehab. So you
Yeah.
had to drop him off at the hospital. And they found his kidneys had shut down. So he spent a week in intensive care, and trying to get his kidneys working again. And he had a friend who he had been out with. The two of them had been using together, and the other friend went into the local rehab or detox, and he died in there. It was the same thing my son had, and the only difference was my son went to a detox and rehab that had the medical care. When they found it with him.
It's a
And
good thing. Yeah.
yeah, he was lucky. So he's still sober. He's got 15 years. So that's really good. But that was tough. 15, he's probably got more than that. I said 15, probably a couple years. So he's probably more than that now. But
That's
yeah,
incredible.
yeah, he's doing really good. Married with 4 kids, and has 2 businesses, and does really well. And both of them do. Both married, and it's nice to see that. But
Yeah.
it was one of my journeys in sobriety that was really difficult, and AA got me through it. People got me through it. I had to really lean on a lot of people because he could have died.
And I'm sure you were scared shitless getting a phone call that, his kidneys are shutting down.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It was it was scary, but I realized what I had done to my parents, and it was just the addiction in the family. I mean, it was there. And even though they were 10 and 12 when I got sober, they still had it. They had it, and it was there for them.
Yeah, if you have two parents, I say this lightly, but you don't really stand a chance to avoid some kind of addiction,
Nope, you don't. Not at all. No. You're going to get
and
it.
you have to make the mistakes that you made, you know, and because I've this is I don't know, I've interviewed over 200 people in the last 3 years, and there's so many people. I want to throw out a number of 80% if I was to try to figure, maybe even 85. And having parents that were addicts is one of the things that, is a consistent thing in what I hear, that people are becoming drug addicts and their parents were also. Um,
Absolutely.
I do a show about trauma. It's a separate show. It's called The Unlicensed Therapist, and I interview people about trauma. And I've only done like 10 episodes of that, but I follow this ACEs quiz, and it's all about if your parents were addicts or if your parents hit you, and all these questions to show, how like far you're gone when it comes to mental health. And one of the drivers is if your parents are addicts, you have to avoid that because you're going to become an addict too.
Right, right. And I believe our addiction takes on so many different forms. And I watched my father. He got sober after me, and it's just amazing. My husband now is in recovery. My ex-husband and his wife are in recovery. It's just, we have it fully now in our family. We have one person that isn't, and that's my nephew. But everybody else is, my nieces, and everybody in the family. My brother's sober still, and it's
That's got to
great.
be that's got to be good for family parties.
It,
You know,
they're very quiet.
I go to family parties, and my brother and sister, they're nowhere near addicts. They know how to drink for fun and not for the effect. And
Mm,
I was visiting Jersey a couple months ago for my niece's first birthday party, and there was a keg there, and it took me back to how much I used to drink, and all the like beer pong and games that I would play with them.
hmm
And I only stayed for like 2 hours. I did a 2.5 hour drive, stayed for 2 hours, and then drove back, just
Yep.
because I knew that the games were about to start and I didn't want to be around it. Like, somebody offered me a vape pen of weed, and I was like, no, I'm clean now. I don't smoke weed, because I quit smoking weed April 1st of this year.
All
Uh,
right. Yeah.
after my dad passed last June, I started smoking weed all day, every day. I manipulated my psychiatrist to give me benzos like Ativan, and then I manipulated him to give me Valium. And I was abusing the Valium. I found myself snorting my Valium and hiding the bottle from my wife so that they didn't notice how much I was using. And eventually I got called out, like, hey, you have a lot less pills than you should have. You're not
Wow.
sober
Yeah.
anymore. And it hit me like I wasn't sober. I'm doing this. I am not sober. So I quit benzos and weed on April 1st of this year, and then I quit gambling July 13th.
Wow.
So there's
Yeah.
many things.
Yep. There. And my son did gambling for a while, and he did really, really good. But I'm sure he gave a lot of it back because it's never in your favor for long.
Yeah, no.
And but yeah, it took on that form, and I remember saying to his wife, I said, I'm happy he's winning, but there will come a time where he won't. And I don't know if I'm assuming it happened because he's no longer gambling. I have to believe that it happened.
Yeah, the
So you
worst
don't
part
stop
about
when you're on the upside.
the worst part about legal gambling, because in Pennsylvania you can do sports betting on like apps on your phone. And the worst part about it is it keeps track of your bets. And so, in July, I looked at my history and it said that I've won $45,000, but I lost $55,000.
Oh
So
yeah.
I
So
was
yep.
$10,000 in a hole, and we struggle for money. We live paycheck to paycheck. My wife's disabled, so
Yeah.
they have MS. So we live paycheck to paycheck. Like, what am I doing spending this money that we don't have?
Right. 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 Exactly. And I'm sure that's what he came to the conclusion of. But it is hard, it's in sobriety, it's learning that balancing act that is so difficult to do.
And
I
commercials these days are all gambling and alcohol.
Yep, yep. In Massachusetts, you can there's casinos everywhere,
Yep.
you know. They have casinos everywhere, so you can gamble and there's the bet, you can do any of the betting now and everything's legal there. Even pot's legal there,
Yep. Yeah.
so it's everywhere.
Yep. You got to stay strong. But
Yep.
I'm glad that we had this conversation, Zoo. It was great hearing your story, and great that you made it to 35 years. That's, not an easy feat.
It's not. It's not, but it's been worth it. Definitely worth it.
Do you go to
You
meetings
know.
down in Florida?
Oh yeah, yeah. I went to a really big one last night in Newport Richey because I'm outside of Tampa. So Newport Richey, and there's probably 150 people there. Two great speakers last night. It was really good.
I
And
miss that about California, the big meetings.
yeah, yeah, it was just so good to do that. And it's not that far from my house. Um, but I love that. And up north, when I go up north, I have my home group there. I have my home group here. I'm very active in service work. I do the hotline. I go into the jails and see the women in the jails and put on a meeting there.
The
So
HNI.
yeah, so I've really stayed active in everything. I have a sponsor. I sponsor people. I think that those are all the things that I have to continue doing. I stopped for a few years when I was about 15 years sober. Stopped going to meetings for a while. My husband was really sick and needed a transplant. So we weren't going to meetings. And after his transplant, we started going back again. And I said, I'm home, I'm home. And I vowed never to leave again.
Yeah, when I because when I relapse, it's the typical story that you hear. I stopped going to meetings, stopped talking to my sponsor, stopped in connection with my higher power.
Yeah.
All those things that you hear is what happened to me. And when I initially got so clean, I started going to AA meetings because there's like no NA presence where I live. So I started going to AA, and I was really I had a rough time because my problem was with drugs and not alcohol. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I had a dream one night, and it was I walked into an AA meeting, and my dad was there, and he said, "Welcome back. I'm glad you're here."
Oh,
So
that's so good.
I knew that I was in the right place by coming back to meetings when I had that dream.
Yep,
Um, I soon after
absolutely.
switched to NA Zoom meetings, just because I needed to talk about drugs, and I identify as an alcoholic and an addict even in NA,
Right.
because I am an alcoholic at the end of the day. I haven't had it. I just checked earlier. I haven't had a sip of alcohol in 1,715 days.
Wow,
So
good.
my wife and I quit on Leap Day 2020. So
Wow.
we can only celebrate our anniversary every 4 years.
That's cute. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those days that I never want to give up because it's such a unique. No, I haven't talked to anybody else that has that sober date yet.
No,
So
I don't think I've met anybody that has. No.
yeah, so there's the two of us, and I don't ever want to give that date up. Of my clean date's April 1st, but I protect 4 different dates, and it's April 25th, 2018 when I quit opiates. It's February 29th of 2020 when I quit alcohol, It's April 1st when I quit benzos and weed, and July 13th when I quit gambling. So,
Wow.
people can be like, oh, so you're only clean 4 months, and it's like, yeah, but at the same time, I'm going to remember those dates because I don't want to drink again. I don't want to do opiates again. So all 4 of those dates are close to me.
Yeah.
So
I
thank
always
you again.
believe, yeah, I always believe that alcohol is really just the tip of the iceberg, that it's all the other stuff underneath that,
Yep.
we have to work on. And
That's,
thank you
that's why
so
you
much.
that's why you do the steps and you continue to do the steps. That's why you sponsor people so you can go through the steps again. And
Again and again and again.
yeah, you're never
I'm
done
doing them
catching
again
resentment.
now.
You're never done catching resentments.
Absolutely. Yep. And
Thank you
yeah.
again, Sue. I'm glad we
Uh,
talked.
Thank you. You have a great day.
You too. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.